Okay, you guys, I have to tell you, I was hoping for this, but I didn't know if it would be in this printing. I know in the early hours there were many different versions of the Dallas Morning News. This is the one that includes the Mary Woodward article. So we're going to read this one entirely. She was actually a witness in Dealey Plaza, and these are her exact words that she wrote on the day of the assassination. And I want you to listen to what she describes and where she describes the gunshots coming from as an ear witness. This one was removed from later printing. Hello and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, then welcome. I'm Jess Cannell, and I think I have some coffee on my glasses. Hang on. Well, I would love to earn your subscription today. Today, actually, I was just thinking about sometimes I get comments on my videos that I'm too smiley when talking about such a sober topic. And I probably should warn you, especially if this is your first visit to the channel, that I am a woman from Texas, and I do try to be welcoming and present whatever topic we're talking about in a way that is pleasant for the viewer. That doesn't mean that I don't take this topic seriously, but we talk about the JFK assassination often here on this channel. And I have found that I am unable to perpetually weep, and yet when the moment calls for it, it continues to be a topic that moves me emotionally. So I just kind of want to say that out at the front, that this is a heavy topic. And we are going to read today something that was actually a gift from a friend of the channel named Corey. He actually gave me this original copy of the November 23rd, 1963 Dallas Morning News. And I was really moved when I received it. I have to be honest. I teared up when I looked at it because it struck me the emotions that the original holders of this particular paper would have felt as they encountered these pages. Now, this one I think must have been a copy that, sat in someone's pile, perhaps, or somebody purchased it for keeping, because it doesn't even look like it's ever been unwrapped or read. But today we are going to do that. I figured many of you may never get to hold this paper. And the city of Dallas in 1963 was a hotbed of varying political views. There were people who obviously thronged out on the day of November 22nd to welcome the president. In fact, it was a much warmer reception than anyone anticipated, which literally is what the final words that President Kennedy probably heard before he was shot and murdered on Elm Street was Mrs. Connolly, the governor's wife. The governor of Texas was John Connolly, and his wife Nellie said to the president, "Well, Mr. President, I don't think you can say that Dallas doesn't love you now." And he said, "No, I don't suppose you can." And then the shots rang out. And so they had received a warm welcome, and there was goodwill from those who were present. And yet, of course, there was hatred, and the debates over that continue to rage over whether or not Lee Oswald was the shooter. And if he was, had he been, radicalized by the hatred in Dallas, or were there other things like Cuba and other issues, that might have motivated him? Or if it wasn't Lee Oswald, or at least not Lee Oswald alone, was it oil interests in Texas that were angry at Kennedy? Was it conservative Democrats and conservatives who hated the president? Was it a civil rights partially motivated? Was it the mafia hating what was happening with RFK and the Justice Department? Was it Russia? Those were the questions that certainly were in the air on the day of November 23rd, if not in the weeks and months that came afterwards. How did this happen? What occurred? Well, we are going to dig into at least section 1. Even as I open it up, I just want to show you that at the next fold, at the very top, is an overview of President Kennedy's life. It says Kennedy's life was spent close to sports. That's how they started the sports section that morning, before talking about the sports world altering their plans because of the grief over the president. Well, here we have the full front page. We can see it's November 23rd, 1963 of the Dallas Morning News. There's Johnson, and then the larger photo of President Kennedy there. It says Johnson becomes president and receives the oath of office on aircraft. In a solemn and sorrowful hour, with a nation mourning its dead president, Lyndon B. Johnson Friday took the oath of office as the 36th chief executive of the United States. So they start with the massive headline, Kennedy slain, but then immediately move to this man. Following custom, the oath taking took place quickly, only an hour and a half after the assassination of President Kennedy. It talks about federal judge Sarah Hughes being the one to administer the oath of office. Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Kennedy, her stocking still flecked with blood from the assassination, flanked the vice president as he raised his right hand in the forward compartment of the presidential jetliner at Love Field. So that was the first column. The second column under LBJ's photo says Governor Connally resting well, because of course Dallas Morning News, yes, this is the headline, but this is the new president and this is the governor of Texas. So it's like normally the governor being shot would be the top news of the day, but it's still on the front page, but it's below the fold, which is shocking, really, that a governor almost losing his life in the city of Dallas doesn't even make the top of the fold on this particular day. That's how huge the news out of Dallas was. Governor John Connally felled Friday by a sniper's bullet in the back, rested in quite satisfactory condition late Friday night at Parkland Hospital, following nearly 4 hours of surgery in the afternoon. An aide for the governor reported at 10:30 p.m. that the governor was asleep and resting comfortably following the incident which claimed President Kennedy's life. Meanwhile, Dr. Tom Shires, chief of surgeon at University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, said Connally barely missed a fatal wound. After consulting with Mrs. Connally and others on the scene, the consensus is that the governor was quite fortunate that he turned to see what happened to the president. If he had not turned to his right, there is a good chance he probably would have been shot through the heart. As it was, the bullet caused a tangential wound. Interesting. Impact, shattering to world capitals. So there's news from various prime ministers and presidents. London, Moscow, Buenos Aires, all different nations were grappling with the news that Kennedy was dead. Pro-communist charged with act. This is at the center of the front page above the fold. A sniper shot and killed President John F. Kennedy on the streets of Dallas Friday. A 24-year-old pro-communist who once tried to defect to Russia was charged with the murder shortly before midnight. Kennedy was shot about 12:20 p.m. Friday at the foot of Elm Street as the presidential car entered the approach to the Triple Underpass. The president died in a 6th-floor surgery room at Parkland Hospital about 1 p.m., though doctors said there was no chance for him to live when he reached the hospital. I don't believe that's true. I think he stayed in trauma room 1 the entire time. So it's interesting to see 12:20 is not actually the right time, depending on whether or not you take Jim Taig's perspective. He was down at a place where he could look up and see the Hertz sign. He said that at the sound of the first shot, he looked up and it said 12:29. Others said they looked around the same time and saw it 12:30. So the time was marked 12:30, but it's 12:29, 12:30, regardless of whose word you take, not 12:20. So in this early printing, there are some factual errors that we can say, yeah, that was not true. He didn't go to a 6th floor surgery room. Perhaps that was to beef up what had been done for the president, even though Parkland was a premier trauma unit for the nation at that time. They saw an average of 3 gunshot wounds a day. They had the expertise to treat just these sort of wounds, but perhaps there was mixed stories put out at that time. Within 2 hours, Vice President Lyndon Johnson was sworn in. The gunman also seriously wounded Texas Governor John Connally, who was riding with the president. We're told Connally spent 4 hours on an operating table, but his condition was reported as quite satisfactory at midnight. Interestingly, I'm going to hold this up for you guys so that you can see it. Look at this paragraph right here. It says the assassin, firing from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building near the Triple Underpass, sent a Mauser 6.5 rifle bullet smashing into the president's head. If you don't know why I'm pointing that out, you may be surprised to learn that for about the first 24 hours, the gun was reported to be a German Mauser. As others have wisely pointed out before me, at some point in that first 24 hours, the gun applied for new citizenship and became an Italian Mannlicher-Carcano. So, you know, they massage the evidence to fit the suspect in custody? It would seem so. And even this early printing shows one of the ways that multiple officers had testified and put affidavits and statements to the effect that what was found on the 6th floor of the school book depository was a German Mauser that had 6.5 stamped on the barrel, is what one of them said. Later, it becomes the Italian Mannlicher-Carcano, and that's what is recorded in history. That is, the Italian Mannlicher-Carcano is the one that famously, the backyard photo shows Lee Oswald holding. However, the assassin, actually, this paragraph is true. The assassin, so we don't identify him as Lee Oswald. In fact, it's very difficult to try to place Lee Oswald on the 6th floor, and it's nearly impossible, I would say impossible, to work out the timing to get him there during the shooting. But it says the assassin, firing from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building near the Triple Underpass, sent a Mauser 6.5 rifle bullet smashing into the president's head. Well, I think that paragraph could be true. I think that is probably what happened, and that the Italian Mannlicher-Carcano was something that was changed after the fact. But let's continue reading. An hour after the president died, police hauled the 24-year-old suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, out of an Oak Cliff movie house. He had worked for a short time at the depository, and police had encountered him while searching the building shortly after the assassination. That's true. Marion Baker and Roy Truly, who was the manager over the Texas School Book Depository and had hired Oswald, encountered him about 90 seconds after the assassination, which again is the timing problem. There are 2 women who credibly were walking down the stairs, and the officer and Roy Truly were coming up the stairs, and at no point was Lee Oswald seen on the stairs, and he was in the 2nd floor cafeteria 90 seconds or less after the shots. And so, like I said, it's very difficult to get Lee Oswald up into the 6th floor window. And he definitely didn't own a Mauser 6.5 rifle. He was also accused of killing a Dallas policeman, J.D. Tippit. Something interesting, actually. It then says they turned him loose when he was identified as an employee, but put out a pickup order on him when he failed to report for a work roll call. You know, I have not actually read that earlier part of that sentence. They turned him loose when he was identified as an employee. It's often accused that he just cut and run, but this printing makes it sound like he was given leave to go and then put out a pickup order on him when he failed to report for a work roll call, which you can't have both. If you release an employee, if you're the manager in charge of the building and you say, oh, no, he's turned loose when he's identified as an employee, but then we're doing a work roll call, right? He's already been turned loose. He's already been identified as an employee and turned loose. He was also accused of killing a Dallas policeman, J.D. Tippit, whose body was found during the vast manhunt for the president's assassin. Well, it's kind of told wrongly. Body was found during the manhunt is not true. That makes it sound like police are out combing through various places and they stumble upon this body. What actually happened is that this police officer was shot and killed. And in fact, this last week, Matt Douthit did a great job in the 3-part discussion of Lee Harvey Oswald's movements after the assassination. So if you're interested in that, you can go back and see that 3-part series. But in part 2 of that series, he walked systematically through the J.D. Tippit murder scene. And he wasn't stumbled upon, but actually there were witnesses who called in on the police radio to make the police department aware that he had been killed. So it's not that his body was found during the vast manhunt. Oswald, who has an extensive pro-communist background, 4 years ago renounced his American citizenship in Russia and tried to become a Russian citizen. Later, he returned to this country. They failed to note, with the help of the State Department and without any follow-up by intelligence and without any tribunals by the Marines, of which he was a part. In fact, we haven't even seen the connection that he was a U.S. Marine in this article yet. We've been told that he is a pro-communist, he is Russian, he was a recent employee. We haven't been told he was a U.S. Marine. That's interesting. I think, that would have raised questions for the average reader at that time. There was a larger percentage of the population that had served in wars and understood the training and responsibilities that came with that, and particularly the elite nature of the Marines and their fighting force. And so that would have probably raised a lot of red flags in that initial introduction to him. Now, it's possible that at the time of this printing, perhaps that fact about his background had not yet been widely shared. But it's interesting that it even hasn't been mentioned yet. Friendly crowd cheered Kennedy. Shockingly, the president was shot after driving the length of Main Street through a crowd termed the largest and friendliest of his 2-day Texas visit. It was a good-natured crowd that surged out from the curbs almost against the swiftly moving presidential car. The protective bubble had been removed from the official convertible. Mrs. Connolly, who occupied one of the 2 jump seats in the car, turned to the president a few moments before and remarked, "You can't say Dallas wasn't friendly to you." At Fort Worth, Kennedy had just delivered one of the most well-received speeches of his career. Then it continues on page 2, so we'll follow the front page. Down at the bottom, it says the funeral for the president will be held on Monday. It talks about the president lying in state, where the funeral will be held, and that his body will be taken a couple of miles to the cathedral. Acting, this is interesting because we know that the president was not buried in this place, but at this time there was discussion and assumptions because President Kennedy had intended to be buried at his family's burial plot. It says acting White House press secretary Andrew Hatcher said he did not know where Kennedy will be buried. There has been one report, still unconfirmed, that burial would be in the family plot in Brookline, Massachusetts. So interestingly, Jackie did, I believe she and maybe McNamara and RFK went out to Arlington and viewed the place and selected it. If you're interested, last year during this Memorial Week, we read through selections from the book, The Death of a President by William Manchester. And in that book, he did an excellent job tracking the movements of Jackie and RFK, and he blends emotional responses with factual detail in a way that's really masterful. And so if you're interested in really immersing yourself in the moments of the assassination, that is a great 10-part series that you may wish to go through. I found it very moving. And then we get to the final column over here under the photo of the president. It says, "Day began as auspiciously as any in Kennedy's career. Gray clouds went away." It was a blue sky and a beautiful day in Dallas after a stormy night. It was a day that started as auspiciously as any in the career of John F. Kennedy. When we boarded, so this is being written by Robert Baskin, someone who was on the plane. When we boarded the presidential jetliner Air Force One at Fort Worth at mid-morning, the White House party was in high spirits. The Fort Worth welcome had been a tremendous one. Shortly before the 15-minute flight to Love Field, ugly gray clouds were swept away by a brisk breeze. The sun was out and the Texas sky was a vivid blue. President and Mrs. Kennedy, she strikingly attired in a pink suit with a pert matching hat, made an instant hit at Love Field as they shook hands with hundreds of persons along the fence line. Then the last journey began. The big open Lincoln car moved out smoothly, carrying Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy and Governor John Connally and his wife, Nellie. I'm just struck by that image. If you remember from our discussion with Vince Palomera, the image of the Secret Service man standing up in the car just behind the president, waving off some of the other agents who were moving to run beside and get up onto the presidential limousine, and instead they were commanded to come back off. If you're interested in Secret Service shenanigans, you'll want to check out that conversation with Vince Palomera. He's an expert on the Secret Service movements and papers and events of that day. 3 cars back was the press pool car in which 3 other newspapermen and I rode. Just ahead of us were Dallas Mayor and Mrs. Earl Cabell and Representative Ray Roberts of McKinney. Malcolm Kilduff, Assistant Presidential Press Secretary, was with us. And as we moved into the heart of the city, Kilduff expressed elation over the friendly nature of the welcome and the great outpouring of people. Everyone in the press car agreed it was one of the most cordial receptions the president had received in quite a while. Buoyed by the cheers of the multitudes on Main Street, our motorcade moved on past the courthouse. Then came the approach to the triple underpass, with the leading cars picking up speed as the crowd thinned out somewhat. Over to our right loomed the gaunt structure labeled the Texas State School Depository. It was 12:30 p.m. The sharp crack of a rifle rang out, but at that moment we couldn't believe it was just that. "What the hell was that?" someone in our car asked. Then there were 2 more shots, measured carefully. We saw people along the street diving for the ground. You know, we've seen those photos of Bill and Gail Newman and others who hit the deck, who went to the grass. They actually covered their children. But he is actually seeing it in mid-action. He says, "We saw people along the street diving for the ground." It would be quite a thing to witness while you're trying to make sense of what in the world happened. Now we are going to try to open this page. There is a rip on the front page and I don't want to make it worse. So I'm going to try to read this without making it worse. President slain. So it says, assassin fires 3 shots into car. At the moment, the assassin, lurking on the 6th floor of the nearby Texas School Book Depository, pressed the trigger. He fired at least 3 carefully measured shots into the car. Kennedy had just turned to grin and wave to some spectators beside the road. Charles Brem, who is one of the witnesses, he says he was waving. He was standing just 15 feet away from the president, and the first shot hit him, and that awful look crossed his face. Shot through the head. The president fell back across the rear seat of the car. Mrs. Kennedy screamed, and then softly crying, "Oh no," moved over to cradle his bloody head. Another bullet had caught Governor Connally in the back beneath the shoulder blade. He slumped to the floor, and Mrs. Connally grabbed him. Pandemonium erupts, it says. Let's read about the aftermath. It says, one of the 2 Secret Servicemen in the front seat of the car grabbed the car telephone. The scene behind them was pandemonium. Spectators were throwing themselves upon children to protect them. Uniformed police swarmed up to the grassy parkway toward the school book warehouse and up the railway embankment. It's kind of a mixing of what happened. Most people ran in the direction of the rail yards, which was behind the grassy knoll, because they thought shots had come from there. Secret Servicemen quickly unholstered guns. At 70 miles an hour, the presidential car sped to Parkland. At the emergency entrance, Connally was able to lurch heavily toward the waiting stretcher. Mrs. Kennedy helped lift her husband onto the stretcher, and Secret Servicemen assisted her into the hospital. She looked stunned, but showed no signs of hysteria. That is one of the things that's very fascinating as you read the account, is that she didn't panic. She was very, very calm and direct and clear in these moments, even while she was stunned. Massive blood transfusions were given. It's told about the signs of life, the various physicians, but they give the account. There was no spontaneous respiration. He had dilated, fixed pupils. It was obvious that he had a lethal head wound. Bullet strikes Connally in the back. Dr. Shaw reports about the governor. It says, I have reason to believe Governor Connally will recover without significant disability. He said that healing would take 10 to 14 days. Officers launched a 2-city manhunt. In this section, we're told about a room-by-room search of the school book depository, and it says, at the window of the southeast corner of the 6th floor, they found 3 spent cartridges. There, also, they found the remnants of a piece of chicken and a soft drink bottle, indicating that the killer had been at his station for some time. Interesting. Police had encountered Oswald, who works in the building, during their check of the building, but had allowed him to go when he was found out to be an employee. They put out a pickup order for him when they discovered that he had been in the building at the time of the shooting. Police theorized that Tippit was trying to arrest Oswald in the 400 block of East Jefferson and lost his life in the attempt. Even that's interesting. He was actually at 10th and Patton, not in the 400 block of Jefferson. Now, Jefferson is a full street away, so perhaps there was just confusion about where that had happened. Mrs. Helen Markham, this is interesting, who was waiting for a bus in that block, said Tippit spotted Oswald on the sidewalk and pulled up the police car to talk to him. Mrs. Markham said that Oswald walked over to the police car and leaned in the window to say something to Tippit. The Oswald then got out of the car to say something to Oswald. All of a sudden, they stopped, looked at each other, and he pulled his gun and shot him down, says Mrs. Markham. I ran to the officer to see if I could help him, she said. I was afraid he was going to kill me too, but I knew I had to help that officer. Now, that's something different than what's actually reported. There were multiple witnesses, and Many people hid in their vehicles or hung back until the suspect ran away from the vehicle, and then they approached Tippit. But let's listen to what Mrs. Markham claims. Mrs. Markham said Tippit tried to say something as he lay dying, but he never got it out. He knew I was there, though. That's very weird. She is identified even by the Warren Commission lawyers. They're like, this woman is squirrely. Her testimony is bonkers. They talked really shamefully about Mrs. Markham because her testimony was really all over the place. She would say she saw something clearly, and then later she would say, I don't know, I didn't see it. So just very, very back and forth, unclear of what she saw. A frustrating person if you're trying to get a good, clear eyewitness account. In a store-by-store search of the area, police found Oswald a few minutes later in the Texas Theater, where a movie called War is Hell was playing. The officers entered from front and back and began to check the thin audience. Patrolman M.N. McDonald said that as he reached Oswald in the 5th seat of the 3rd row from the rear, Oswald stood up and said, "This is it." He tried to pull a gun from his belt, and McDonald charged him. In the scuffle, the trigger of the gun was pulled, but it did not fire. 7 policemen seized Oswald and hauled him out of the theater. A gathering crowd began yelling, "Kill him! Kill him!" McDonald said Oswald said, "It's all over now," when he rushed him. We're told suspect had lived in Russia. Okay, we do get the first mention that he is a former Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine, I would say. I'm the mother of a Marine, so Semper Fi. Oswald, member of a respected Fort Worth family, is a former Marine. Well, that's interesting. A respected Fort Worth family. Later, they try to make his mother out to be crazy, so it's interesting. I hadn't seen him being described as a respectable member of any family. 4 years ago, he turned up in Moscow, renounced his American citizenship, and asked for Russian citizenship. The Russians refused. Oswald refused to stay in the Soviet Union as a resident alien and returned to the United States. Homicide Captain Will Fritz said Oswald had told him he was pro-Castro. House Un-American Activity Committee records identify him as secretary of the New Orleans chapter of Fair Play for Cuba. Records also show that Oswald identified himself as a Marxist in a radio debate in New Orleans during the summer of 1962. Word of the murder of the president swept rapidly through the city. Well, we're told about Judge Hughes administering the oath. We're told about hundreds gathering around the hospital. Announcement of a death being made. The continuation of the story about Connolly, then the reactions from France's President de Gaulle, Pope Paul VI, Adlai Stevenson, and more. We do, up at the top, we have a view of the President and Mrs. Kennedy in the car. And we have a look at the Texas School Book Depository window and the sniper's nest. It says this is the 6th floor window where the killer lay in wait. He watched through a telescope sight as President John F. Kennedy's motorcade moved along Elm Street. 7 have died in office, 4 by assassin's hand. So this would be one of the pieces of information that people would wonder is exactly how many presidents have we lost like this? It says since 1841, 7 U.S. presidents, including John F. Kennedy, have died in office. 4 of them by assassination. Ironically, death removed from office all of those elected in years ending in a 0. That was true until 1980. You may recall President Reagan did survive an assassination attempt. So there was an assassination attempt on his life, and he would have been the one that would have been the very next one to continue that year of the zeros. He was elected in 1980. And then Bush was elected in the year 2000 to begin his term in 2000. And of course, he didn't die in office. And then in 2020, that would have been Biden, and he did not die in office. So that is no longer the case. But at this point, all presidents who had begun their year ending in a 0 had died. William Henry Harrison, the first to die, was elected in 1840. He died of pneumonia. Abraham Lincoln, elected in 1860, was assassinated on April 14th, 1865. James Garfield, elected in 1880, was shot in July, died September 9th. William McKinley was shot by an assassin September 6th, 1901, died 8 days later. He had been elected in 1900. Warren G. Harding, elected in 1920, died of natural causes in 23. FDR, elected in 1940, died April 12th, 1945 of natural causes. And then John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960, was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. There is a floor plan of the building. It shows the big open nature of that whole 6th floor. Kennedy killer hid in an area used little. I don't see any mention of the fact that the building was undergoing renovation and getting new floors during the time of the assassination, which also would have been something that would have alerted readers. Okay, you guys, I have to tell you, I was hoping for this, but I didn't know if it would be in this printing. I know in the early hours there were many different versions of the Dallas Morning News. This is the one that includes the Mary Woodward article. So we're going to read this one entirely. She was actually a witness in Dealey Plaza, and these are her exact words that she wrote on the day of the assassination. And I want you to listen to what she describes and where she describes the gunshots coming from as an ear witness. This one was removed from later printings and it was kind of downplayed, but it's an important article from the day of, just like the front page describing the weapon as a 6.5 Mauser, a German Mauser, not an Italian Mannlicher-Carcano. This is the printing that includes this important article by Mary Woodward, and I'm going to put up a photo of the article so you can read along next to me while I read. It says, the following eyewitness account was written by a Dallas News staff writer, Mary E. Woodward. 4 of us from Women's News, Maggie Brown, Aurelia Alonzo, and my roommate, Ann Donaldson, and myself, had decided to spend our lunch hour by going to see the president. We took our lunch along, some crackers and apples, and started walking down Houston Street. We decided to cross Elm and wait there on the grassy slope just east of the Tech Triple Underpass, since there weren't very many people there and we could get a better view. We had been waiting about half an hour when the first motorcycle escorts came by, followed shortly by the president's car. The president was looking straight ahead, and we were afraid we would not get to see his face, but we started clapping and cheering, and both he and Mrs. Kennedy turned and smiled and waved directly at us, it seemed. Jackie was wearing a beautiful pink suit with a beret to match. The term of pillbox hat apparently wasn't in full conversational use yet. 2 of us who had seen the president last during the final weeks of the 1960 campaign remarked almost simultaneously how relaxed and robust he looked. As it turned out, we were almost certainly the last faces he noticed in the crowd. Whew, wouldn't that be intense to ponder that we might have been some of the last faces that our president looked at? After acknowledging our cheers, he faced forward again, and suddenly there was a horrible, ear-shattering noise coming from behind us and a little to the right. She's described herself on the grassy slope just east of the Triple Underpass, which means somewhere around the pergola. I believe their location has been identified, but no matter where you put them on that grassy slope, the Texas School Book Depository would be back up and to the left. She describes the shot that rang out, an horrible, ear-shattering noise coming from behind us and a little to the right. My first reaction, and also my friends, was that as a joke, someone had backfired their car. Apparently, the driver and occupants of the president's car had the same impression, because instead of speeding up, the car came almost to a halt. I want to tell you, especially if you are new to the channel, that this summer I was privileged to be able to sit down with Marianne Moorman. She is one of the eyewitnesses who was standing just across from the Grassy Knoll. She took the most famous photo of the assassination at the moment when the headshot was likely taken by the assassin who did the fatal shot. And she told me this very same thing, that the car hesitated, that it almost came to a stop, but it didn't stop. That was her description, and that is this description as well. Came almost to a halt. The brake lights are visible in some of the photography and films of the day. So we know that the vehicle did slow, that the driver, Bill Greer, at least whether he was acting contrary to training, whether it was nefarious or not, whether it was just an instinct of like, wait, what's going on? Like we all do when we're a little bit stressed and we maybe would hit the brake to look around, or maybe it was just a reflex of his leg. Whatever the case, the brakes were hit, the car slowed. But like she describes, that matches what Marianne Moorman today in 2025 at 93 years old, she still describes it that way, that it hesitated but didn't actually stop. This description is the car. Apparently, the driver and occupants of the president's car had the same impression, because instead of speeding up, the car came almost to a halt. Things are a little hazy from this point, but I don't believe anyone was hit with the first bullet. Interesting. That is the way it's described by the witness who would have been standing across the street from her, who said that she observed that a bullet hit the pavement before any of the other shots. Robert Groden has said and has shown in his research of the Zapruder film that there is a frame where there is no white mark on the concrete, and in the very next frame there is a white mark in the concrete in the exact place where that eyewitness describes it. So that could fit with what Mrs. Woodward is describing. She says, I don't believe anyone was hit with the first bullet. The president and Mrs. Kennedy turned and looked around as if they too didn't believe the noise was really coming from a gun. Robert Groden, again, he has done his frame-by-frame analysis of the film. He notes that the president is waving and then all of a sudden the hand drops. That would be at this moment where something is noticed. They don't yet have a clear Jack's been shot. He's not yet doing this. There is no shot that has struck anyone, but they're all of a sudden alerted. There's something that happens. So his smile, he's still smiling, but his hand begins to drop. Then, after a moment's pause, there was another shot, and I saw the president start slumping in the car. This was followed rapidly by another shot. Mrs. Kennedy stood up in the car, turned halfway around, then fell on top of her husband's body. This would have been the first description. The Zapruder film hadn't been seen. Not everything is known yet about Jackie even getting up on top of the car to go for the piece of brain that she would later hand to the doctors in Parkland and say, if this could help. And she offers the piece of her husband's brain to the surgeons there. But before any of that, this eyewitness is saying Mrs. Kennedy stood up in the car, turned halfway around, then fell on top of her husband's body. That's a good early eyewitness description. She's now up the hill, but she's describing what she saw, and it's accurate. It's a good view of what happened. Not until this minute did it sink in what actually was happening. We had witnessed the assassination of the president. You can imagine this is all happening in, say, 6 to 10 seconds at most. The points that she's witnessing, a shot that doesn't seem to hit the president, which of course is ignored by the Warren Commission because they need to make it down to 3. And there's way too much going on in the car. And then you have Lee Bowers way down by the triple underpass that also gets a shot. So you got to do away with this shot that she describes. This shot is not in the Warren Commission formula of shots. But from that point until it sinks in for her, she has maybe 10 seconds of her life where they think it's a joke, then the president slumps, then Mrs. Kennedy stands, and now it's sinking in. We had witnessed the assassination of the president. The cars behind stopped, and several men, Secret Servicemen, I suppose, got out and started rushing forward, obstructing our view of the president's car. Well, this is interesting. This matches, we recently read in JFK Breaking the Silence, we read the account of Bill and Gail Newman, and he actually described this very same thing. And I kind of said, I haven't heard this from anyone else, so I'm not sure that it really happened. It's not on the films. Well, perhaps it was a few cars back. It was not the people in the car in front. I would actually love to talk to Vince Palomera about this and understand this part better, because this is now two eyewitnesses, Bill Newman and Mary Woodward, saying the cars behind stopped. And also I want to note that some people who say the motorcade stopped could be describing this event. So Marianne Moorman and Mary Woodward say the car hesitated or the car almost came to a halt. But the cars did stop. Some of the cars in the motorcade did stop. So I just want to point out that when we're hearing the motorcade stopped and people got out, there are multiple vehicles in this motorcade. And at this point, when people are stopping and getting out, the presidential limousine is already speeding toward Parkland. Clint Hill is reportedly on the back of the vehicle, just banging his fist and giving the sign to the vehicle behind him that the president will not make it. So that's what's happening at this moment when the cars behind stopped and several men, Secret Service men, I suppose, got out and started rushing forward, obstructing our view of the president's car. That sounds very, it sounds possible as if she could still possibly see the president's car. So it sounds very immediate, which is the way that Bill Newman also described it. So I really would love to hear, is this the third car back? Is it the fourth car back? Who is getting out? Who got out? I'd love to know. Then I started looking around at the stunned crowd. About 10 feet from where we were standing, a man and a woman had thrown their small child to the ground and covered his body with theirs. Apparently, the bullets had whizzed directly over their heads. So she is an eyewitness who is hearing the eyewitness account of Bill and Gail Newman that he later describes on WFAA television here in Dallas. He's saying, this is what I experienced. And he says it felt like the bullets went right by our heads from that small garden behind us, which is the Grassy Knoll area. It's not the Texas School Book Depository over here. It's the garden over here behind us. Next to us were two Negro women. One collapsed in the other's arms, weeping and uttering what everyone was thinking. They've shot him. The collective grief of that moment would be so much to take in, to observe people literally protecting their children from bullets, women holding each other and weeping. Everyone simultaneously having their immediate response to the grievous moment. It's sinking in for her. Those women, it's sinking in for her, and she's observing others. It sunk in for those women, and they just moved to deep grief and sorrow. Each person is dealing with the reaction in the moment. And those are the moments that we know, according to scientific research, you're not in control of how you're responding. You are just in instinct mode. There's fight or flight happening for the entire crowd. Everyone is just reacting without thinking. It still seems like a horrible nightmare. It will be a real life nightmare to haunt us all for a long time to come. Those are the eyewitness words of Mary Woodward. I'm so thankful that my copy has that. Robert Groden has actually told me, be on the lookout for that. And so I feel very grateful to own a copy. I think this is an example of why physical materials matter. In an age of digital news, in an age of audio-visual news, there is still the significance of physical copies of books, physical copies of newspapers that can preserve It really was identified as a German Mauser and printed credibly on the front page of the newspaper the following day. It really was said that bullets whizzed past, that she heard it come from back and to the right, behind us, an earth-shattering noise coming from behind us and a little to the right. All of that is Grassy Knoll. It is not the Texas School Book Depository. Now we get to Lyndon Johnson and the photo of him taking the oath next to the stunned Jackie. There's a photo of the presidential family now with Lady Bird, Lucy Baines, and Linda Bird. We've talked about before that they all have, with Lady Bird's nickname, they all have the LBJ initials. Something interesting that I'll show you is that this photo of Lee Oswald on page 5, this description was later, I don't mean by the Dallas Morning News, but I mean people later said that this motion of Lee Oswald was a power symbol of communism. But this photo actually attributes it correctly. It says Lee Harvey Oswald displays his handcuffs following the arrest. I believe somebody asked, are you cuffed? And he shows, here, I am cuffed. And that's what he's doing, is displaying. Can you see? Yeah, I've got handcuffs, not a communist power symbol. We need to consider the ways that Americans are propagandized from before this point on and following this day and even to the modern day. What are we being told about supposed criminals? Quick explanations to assassinations or political violence that maybe don't match what logic would tell us, but we're given enough visual cues and we're given a storyline that we're meant to believe. This being a communist, mug to the camera is a totally different interpretation than what's said here, which is Lee Harvey Oswald displays his handcuffs following arrest. There's different headlines. We're not going to read them all, but here are the headlines. Johnson receives bipartisan support. Oswald asked for aid to return to the U.S. Okay, so there is a report. Lee Harvey Oswald of Fort Worth wrote Senator John Tower in January 1962 from the Soviet Union asking for the senator's assistance in returning to the United States. A man with the same name is being held in Dallas as a suspect in the assassination of President Kennedy. It talks about the records identifying him as the leader of Fair Play for Cuba. Records show that he identified himself as a Marxist. A State Department file shows that one Lee H. Oswald wrote the U.S. Embassy in the Soviet Union asking for arrangements for a loan from the embassy or some organization for part of the airplane fare. So it's told about that. Well, I'm glad that was being put out immediately. There's a photo of President Kennedy from Fort Worth that morning. It says President Kennedy is shown as he addressed a Fort Worth breakfast meeting Friday morning, shortly before leaving for Dallas, where he was to make a luncheon speech. Behind him, right to left, are Vice President Lyndon Johnson, Governor John Connally, and Senator Ralph Yarborough. The question is long planning. Hugh Ainsworth, who is one of the reporters that has some books, and I've got one of his books here, but he was one of the reporters who was not in Dealey Plaza at the very moment of the assassination, but he ran over and got many eyewitness accounts. I believe he also was the first one to speak to Earlene Roberts, the landlady. He's reporting about that here. He says Oswald rented room under alias. Lee H. Oswald might have been planning the assassination of President Kennedy for more than a month. The suspected killer had moved into a rooming house at 1026 North Beckley on October 14th in the middle of the night. He gave an alias, O.H. Lee. I want to let you know, if you're not a longtime viewer, or maybe if you are and you missed it, this summer we went and talked with Miss Pat Hall. She is the granddaughter of the landlady who owned it at the time, and she still runs it for tours. She talks about Mr. Lee, and people thought, why is she calling him Mr. Lee? Well, it's because that's how they knew him, as O.H. Lee, so they called him Mr. Lee. And she told stories of being, I believe she was an 11-year-old girl at the time, and she knew Lee Oswald. And so she tells about her recollections, and we got a tour of that boarding house. So if you're interested, you'll want to go back and check that out. It's a very fascinating look at the interior of that boarding house, and to get to hear Miss Pat's stories firsthand of knowing Lee Oswald. It says he seldom spoke to anyone. Never did he take part in the joking among the 16 other roomers. He was termed polite, but never had anything to say. His landlords, Mr. and Mrs. A.C. Johnson. So there's Earlene Roberts, who was the housekeeper that was there at the time, but then the Johnsons owned the boarding house. They live in the huge old house, said he paid $8 a week for a plain 5 by 12 foot room. Well, hold out your arms, and almost anybody watching this video, if you hold out your arms, that is longer probably than the width of the room. It is a 5 foot wide room. Literally has room for a little twin bed. There was a little table and the wardrobe. That was it. And you can see that again in that boarding house tour, but it is a small room that he rented. Very fascinating. He was always polite and a gentleman, Mrs. Johnson said, but he didn't seem to have any friends, any words for anyone, or any interests. The housekeeper, 58-year-old Mrs. Earlene Roberts, said the thin suspect ran in the front door while she was listening to a television report of the shooting of President Kennedy. The Oak Cliff rooming house is about 2 miles from the scene of the assassination. He came in running like the dickens, she recalled, and I said to him, "You sure are in a hurry," but he didn't say anything, just ran in his room, got a short tan coat, and ran back out. Mrs. Roberts, who cleaned up all the rooms daily, said Oswald was neat and clean and ate a lot of fruit, made coffee and sandwiches in his tiny room, and kept no late hours. He was always in bed by 9:30 or 10 p.m., she said. Mr. Johnson said he noted Oswald would retire early and listen to his small radio. He had no pictures in the room, only a lamp on a small stand, an ancient vanity dresser, and a small clothes holder. Johnson said Oswald, quote, always talked in that foreign language when he talked on the phone, Mrs. Roberts said. I actually got to pick up that phone that he used to take calls on, and Mrs. Groden insisted on taking a photo of me with it. So I got to do that, which is crazy. But here's the account from Mrs. Roberts. She said he dialed that BL number in Irving a lot. Both agreed that Oswald never spent a weekend there. He left after work Friday night and didn't return until Monday night. I didn't know him by name, said another roomer. I just took it for granted he didn't like people. Everybody left him alone. Oswald apparently didn't have any clothes in his small room. Quote, just a few pieces, said the housekeeper, but he had a big zipper bag he stuffed things into. She said he liked to read Westerns, but she had never noted any mail, pictures, addresses, and such when she cleaned up. FBI and Secret Servicemen grabbed up his few belongings before the press arrived, but Mrs. Roberts said one thing she noticed was a map of Dallas. A police officer who helped search the man's apartment said he found communist literature, a picture of Red Square, and a book believed to contain Russian ration stamps. Very interesting. It has a photo of that 1026 North Beckley boarding house. At the bottom of this page, it says, worker tells JFK parents. A workman told the president's father and mother in Hyannisport Friday that the president had been shot while visiting Dallas. Reports were that neither the president's father, former Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, nor the president's mother immediately commented when told of the shooting. The president's father is a semi-invalid as a result of a stroke several years ago. He was napping when the word came. The president had planned to spend the Thanksgiving holiday at Hyannisport next week. The elder Kennedy's niece, Miss Anne Garden, it says, which is actually Gargan. And if you recognize that name, it's because Joey Gargan, you probably recognize it from Joey Gargan. Her brother was the Kennedy cousin that had planned the weekend in Chappaquiddick when Ted Kennedy had his fateful situation in 1969. So Miss Anne Garden is how it's written here, but her name is, of course, Miss Anne Gargan. She was the personal assistant and caretaker for the president's father, Joseph Kennedy. I actually read through a few of the days and accounts in a book called The Kennedy Case. It was written by the nurse, Rita Dallas. Yes, her name was Rita Dallas. And so if you're interested in that, I'll just kind of throw out these things as resources. If you're interested in any more information about how the president's family received that information, that was an excellent and eye-opening episode. It does go into the physical and mental condition of Joseph Kennedy at the time, as well as how Mrs. Kennedy, his mother, handled it. It's actually kind of interesting. There's this small headline that I almost overlooked that says Oswald said opposed to authority. He was always opposed to any kind of discipline. He seemed to hold it against people up there, any authority. A Fort Worth police officer was describing Lee Harvey Oswald as he knew him from 5th grade classes through 11th grade football practice in Fort Worth. So a Fort Worth policeman personally knew Lee Oswald. The policeman, who asked to remain anonymous just in case, quote, any more of those people are running loose, said Oswald, quote, was never like any other kid. During B-team football practice in 1956, Oswald was caught drinking water without the coach's permission. Quote, the coach kind of flew off the handle. After he reprimanded Oswald, the kid yelled back that it's supposed to be a free country. A man's supposed to be able to do what he wants. He didn't associate hardly at all, but he wasn't a troublemaker. He talked a good bit in high school about how things should be. When the officer knew him, he said Oswald was short and stocky with a real large neck. At the base, it went almost out like shoulders. The officer heard the news of Oswald's arrest while returning from testifying at a DWI trial in Fort Worth. When I heard about the president's death, I hadn't tied him in at all, although friends told me a few weeks ago he was back in the country. When I heard his name mentioned, it really wasn't surprising. Interesting. That's the first eyewitness account. It's an anonymous account. I wonder if anybody ever identified this man. If you know, please leave it in the comments. I love when y'all make our research more robust on this channel, so I would love to hear from you. There's a few more headlines on this page, but one that caught my eyes. DA predicts insanity plea by Oswald. So the DA is already looking at what will be his plea. It says the legal test of sanity under Texas criminal law is whether the defendant, quote, can distinguish between right and wrong and is aware of the nature and consequences of his acts. And it already says Wade can argue that since Oswald fled, it is obvious he knew the nature of his acts. Very interesting. Well, on the next page, we're given our first look at Marina Oswald, Marguerite Oswald. They have sheriffs or Texas policemen behind them in their cowboy hats. Marina is holding the baby Rachel, and June is there kind of ducking from the camera. It's very interesting and sad to me, honestly. If you don't know, I'm a mother of a large family. I have resonated with Marina in these photos. I recognize the vulnerability of that postpartum season and how sensitive you already feel. Even if everything goes well, even if your husband is not involved in anything like this. But she had not been with her husband. They had been separated and having some problems and difficulties. He leaves the house that morning, and by the end of the night, there she is in the Dallas City jail with her mother-in-law and her daughter and her baby. Just what a shocking day that would be as a young woman who didn't really speak the language, like had a little bit of working English, but certainly not enough to handle and enter fully into a day like this. And even a fully, English speaking woman in postpartum with the shock of the day would have trouble mentally cluing in to everything that's happening and really being present. I mean, you're still nursing the baby nonstop at this age, but then to be in the middle of all of this when Russian is your first language, it would be a shocking position to be in for anyone. What I'm going to do at this point is flip through and see if there's any other information that's needed for us to notice. On page 11, there's a headline that's interesting. It says, Kennedy in Fort Worth kept darting into crowds. He did. He kept wanting to go ahead and connect with voters. He basically viewed it like, I'm here and I'm trying to win these people over, so every opportunity I have, I'm going to do that. He had even in Dallas stopped the motorcade a couple of times to just shake hands. But here it says, a supporter said it Friday morning, quote, he likes people, maybe too much. He takes an awful chance moving around like he does. Few in the crowd of 12,000 outside Hotel Texas would have taken his remarks seriously. So that person apparently said that before the assassination. And actually, President Kennedy, the morning of the assassination, reportedly was talking about a potential assassination. And he told his wife, he said, basically, if anyone was going to get me, last night would have been the perfect time to do that because it was rainy, it was dark, the flash bulbs from reporters were very bright, and so the Secret Servicemen were having a hard time seeing, and he said it would have been so easy on a night like that for an assassin to take me out and slip his gun right into a briefcase and walk away into the darkness. When I first heard that he had spoken about his own assassination that morning, I was skeptical, but that account was recorded not just by Manchester, but Kenny O'Donnell and Mrs. Kennedy both apparently heard him say that, and it's recorded credibly in many places. So he really was speaking about his own assassination the morning of the assassination. One little article I want to point out, and the reason why I'm pointing it out is because so many viewers on this channel take time in the comments, and I'm so grateful every time you do it, to share your own personal stories. And almost always, you guys were school children. The people who are still alive, for the most part, were not even yet adults by the time that the assassination happened. Few who were adults are still with us. But many who were school children remember how they were given the news. And it's always interesting to hear whether it was the tears from a principal, the announcement followed by gasps, students who were told something sad had happened and to go home and ask your parents, and they walk into the living room and find their mother weeping and remember that she wept for days and days on end. Those are the school child memories that you guys have shared with me over the last year as we've been talking about the Kennedy assassination. And there's a little short article here that says, school children by the thousands joined the other mourners of President Kennedy Friday. A Hockaday second grade teacher called away from her upset charges for a moment, found them on her return at the blackboards where they were drawing pictures of the children of the world weeping. One small girl had written a note, "Dear Mr. President, I loved you very much." At Harry Stone's school, a third grade teacher tried to rally her weeping crowd by telling them they would have to forget the assassination. She suggested they begin by singing and asked for a song suggestion. The somber class at first had no suggestions, but a small boy finally spoke up. "Let's sing the Star-Spangled Banner," he said. Very, very sad. Well, here it has the pre-Christmas sale on GE and Goodyear and various portable televisions and coffee table stereos. One of the things that we're apt to forget when we talk about the assassination is that it landed smack dab 1 week before Thanksgiving and right in the middle of the holiday advertising season. And so every time I go to read period, Life magazines, Look magazines, or newspapers, it's intermingled with Christmas advertisements for children's toys and appliances for the missus. Things that seem so disjointed with the great grief of the moment, and yet were part of reality for those moving through these days. Across from the Christmas advertisement is a super important photo, actually. It says, Police Lieutenant Carl Day with sniper's weapon. One of the things that I want to call you to notice in this photo so that you can do your own research is apparently the points where the strap attaches to the weapon are different on a Mauser versus an Italian Carcano. So you can do your own research. Which weapon is this? You're welcome to leave it in the comments what you find about this weapon, but this is a timely, officially printed photo after page 1 has already told us that the weapon was a German Mauser, after multiple police representatives and sheriff's department deputies had signed their name to documents saying it was a 6.5 German Mauser. Weapons cannot apply for a change in citizenship. Weapons do not change their size. Weapons cannot alter where the straps are attached. There are ways that if you look at Oswald's rifle in his backyard photo, it's attached in certain places. Purportedly, I actually haven't done the research myself to say, so I'd love for you to tell me what you've learned. But purportedly, those two weapons are attached in different places. So that's a jumping off place for you from the day after the assassination. Documentation of what was found, what was seen, what was done. Gosh, you guys, it just goes on and on and on. At this point, we are on page 14. There are photos from the breakfast moment when Jackie Kennedy had arrived. The crowd had been really disappointed when she hadn't been there that morning, and they were thrilled to see her when she finally did arrive. Kennedy made his famous joke that it takes Mrs. Kennedy a little longer, but she looks far better than we do once she finally makes it, and the crowd just loved it. Various headlines here are Mrs. Kennedy's secretary praises new first lady. Cabell says Dallas shocked by slaying. World that has toasted Jackie weeps for her. 1947 law set up order for president succession. Members of the family converging on the Cape. Mrs. Kennedy's composure never gave way. Wife put ring on. The body of president to rest on catafalque in White House. That was something that she decided. She modeled President Kennedy's funeral after President Lincoln's funeral, even to a riderless horse that pulled the body. Things like the boots being worn backwards. There were very many symbolic images embedded in the funeral when you go looking for it. Builders say the top was not bulletproof. So they're already saying, the car in which President Kennedy was fatally shot, custom built, was not bulletproof. The presidential Continental had more specially designed features than any car ever before. But Ford Motor Company, which owned the car and leased it to the White House, said it was not equipped with a bulletproof top or bulletproof glass. So they're essentially trying to tamp down the idea that, well, if the top had been on, it would have been bulletproof. They're saying, no, it wouldn't have. Johnson chose to run at urging of Kennedy. That's sort of a retelling of it, isn't it? Johnson deeply loyal. Decision cost JFK his life. It's saying that the president deciding to ride in a motorcade through downtown Dallas was the thing that cost him his life. Now we get into long form descriptions of John Kennedy. The entire page here is about his work. It says, John F. Kennedy, at 43, youngest elected president. So it's a look back at his work on Cuban crisis, Soviets, civil rights, business, industry, quarantine, Vietnam, all the things that were crises during his presidency. It says he was the first to face the possibility of nuclear warfare. So very interesting. His entrance into politics at age 29, and that the stock exchange was closed after his shooting. Schedules are revised in various things, even, entertainment and opera and transportation and sports, games. Everything is being changed and altered out of honoring the president. So that is this first fold, this first section of the Dallas Morning News from November 23rd. Again, the next one, I'm just going to look at the fronts because I think we're to the end of our time, but I'm just going to look at the fronts. It shows on the sports section, it shows sportsman JFK. And then here on the next fold, perhaps we'll look at this. It has suspense at the scene of assassination. We see Bill and Gail Newman. We see photographers huddled around them. I believe if you look in some versions of this, you can see actually Mr. Zapruder and Mrs. Sitzman walking back, perhaps right there. But there's various people coming out of the pergola. There's the crowd. This motorcycleman seems to be looking up toward the railroad bridge. But President's murder charged to Oswald. So this is the official charging of Oswald. One of the things that Neiman Marcus, which is a long-time Dallas brand. It's an elite luxury brand of clothes and other things, a department store that's unique to Dallas. They just took out an entire half page that just had Neiman Marcus and the name of John F. Kennedy, just to honor him. That's very, very respectful. But one of the things that you watch in that midnight press conference of Lee Oswald is when he says, I have not yet been charged with that. I did not do anything. I have not shot anybody. And someone from the crowd, one of the reporters, I believe, informs him, you have been charged with that. And when you watch it, I want to encourage you to use that 10-second back button that YouTube gives us. Watch it and go back. Watch it again and keep watching it. And I think what we're seeing in that moment, he does a double take. He looks and he looks again, and he kind of stunned. He falls back a little bit and his lips purse. And I think what we're seeing is a man who is shocked and expected for the charge not to stick. He is surprised that he has been charged with the shooting of the president. We're not seeing a man who's proud of having done it. We're not seeing somebody who's seeking infamy and finally has it in his grasp. We see someone who is shocked and surprised and startled by the news. There's a bunch of letters on this side, but up at the top here you can see it says, slain officer gave his all. And there's a look at the J.D. Tippit murder. It says, policeman J.D. Tippit came home for lunch Friday at about 11:30 a.m. He hurried through his dinner and reported for duty. Little more than an hour later, he was the gunshot victim of a killer on an Oak Cliff street. Very interesting. That was written also by Hugh Ainsworth. We have governor's wife tells of bullets. So she tells about the bullets. It says she heard the first shot and Governor Connolly turned around and looked at the president. Then, just as Connolly turned around, he was hit by the second bullet. She thought she heard a third shot. After the two shots, Mrs. Kennedy grabbed the president and Mrs. Connolly says she grabbed the governor and all ducked down in the car. Police heard no rumors of plot to kill Kennedy is the next headline. Shock, anger, prayer, coast-to-coast reaction. Connolly wanted president to call off the trip to Texas. That's very interesting. The irony of the fatal presidential trip to Texas is that Governor John Connolly tried to call it off. Now, there is a lot of discussion about this among the group of people who believe there was a conspiracy. There are people who believe that LBJ was in on it, or even that he was the mastermind of the assassination. And then among those groups or adjacent groups, there's discussions of whether or not John Connally knew about it. Reportedly, one of the things that he called out right after being shot was, "They're going to kill us all," which implies there's a they, and implies that perhaps he knew. Now, I can't say whether or not he said that, and I can't say whether or not he knew, obviously. But again, those are jumping off places for you in your research. One thing it mentions that is something I have thought about doing a talk about, and I would love y'all's input about whether or not you're interested. It says flight of 6 members of cabinet reversed. Did you know that 6 members of the cabinet were on their way toward Tokyo when the shooting happened? Not only that, so that takes out almost half, I believe, of the cabinet just on that one flight. But not only that, some of them were in the line of succession. And when they went to look for the code books, which is an important book that would give you the nuclear codes so that you could be in charge, so that the president or anybody who had to act in the position of president could act like they needed to, which was kept under lock and key. But when they went to look, it was not in their plane as it should have been. So that's one of those interesting things. That's actually reported in the book High Treason by Robert Groden. That's the first place that I encountered it. Well, that is the end of our look at this paper. I hope it was meaningful to you. I hope it was insightful. I really appreciated getting to see for myself that right here on the front page is the mention of the Mauser 6.5. And then on page 2 was the description of shots coming from back and to the right from the Grassy area on the knoll. Very fascinating. That article was later removed from the printing. And then, of course, just in taking the emotion and sobriety of this day, the day when Kennedy was slain on a Dallas street and Kennedy fell and Johnson became president. I hope this was moving, informative for you. Let me know in the comments what you noticed, what stands out to you, what you were glad to hear. I'd also like to say a special thank you to Corey for giving me this beautiful gift. And I kept it in mostly the same condition it was given to me, but I feel very grateful to not only be able to go through it and to own it, but to be able to share it with others. And I hope I did it justice. I hope you enjoyed this video as well, Corey. I hope you have a great day. I hope you'll take advantage of some of those things that I mentioned. I think one of the most thorough accounts we've done on this channel is that 10-episode series on the death of a president by William Manchester. We are currently working our way through the JFK assassination through a variety of literature, and we have made it to the after part where we are looking at the investigations that came after the assassination. So please come back next time. We will be jumping into the remainder of that series. So I'd want to welcome you back to our continuation of that series. You can start with part 1 and work your way through if you'd like to catch up. There's a playlist to that effect. So I would love for you to be able to do that. Let me know in the comments what stands out to you, and I hope you have a great day. We'll see you soon. Bye.